The Faceless Woman. It was supposed to be a quick, relaxing getaway. Mark and his girlfriend Emily had found an old cabin in the mountains through a listing online. It wasn't fancy, but it had a rustic charm that drew them in. The listing mentioned that it was deeply isolated, a rare find for privacy and peace, a perfect place to escape. They arrived just before sunset, unpacked their things, and set up in the cabin. But as night fell, they began to feel the depth of the isolation. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, not even a landline. The silence in the mountains was deafening. Around midnight, Emily woke up to a strange, scratching sound. It was faint at first, but soon it grew louder, coming from somewhere outside. She woke Mark, who listened intently, his expression quickly changing from annoyance to concern. The scratching sounded like someone dragging their nails along the outside of the cabin walls. Mark grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside to check. The trees were thick, casting strange shadows that swayed in the night breeze, and everything felt too quiet. He circled the cabin, shining his light across the rough wood, but saw nothing unusual. After a while, the scratching stopped. He dismissed it as an animal, but a nagging sense of unease lingered. They went back to bed, only to be awakened an hour later by the same scratching sound. This time, it was coming from the window. Emily looked over and saw a shadowy figure standing outside. The figure's face was pressed right up against the glass, as if trying to peer inside. Her heart pounded as she realized that this wasn't just any figure. There was something deeply wrong with it. She could barely make out the details, but it looked like a woman in a ragged dress, her face obscured in the darkness. Emily couldn't move, couldn't even breathe as the figure stared in. Then, without warning, the figure's hand began to scrape along the glass, leaving dark streaks. Mark grabbed her hand and pulled her out of bed, away from the window. They crept toward the door, hoping to escape, but as they reached for the handle, there was a slow, deliberate knock. 3 hard raps echoed through the cabin. They froze, waiting in silence. After what felt like an eternity, Mark managed to gather enough courage to peek through the window near the door. The figure was gone, replaced by a dark, empty night. Still, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. They didn't sleep much that night, keeping all the lights on until the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. When they stepped outside to leave, they noticed something strange on the cabin walls. Deep, jagged scratch marks, like something with claws had scraped along the entire perimeter. Shaken, they decided to leave. But as they were packing up the car, they heard a faint voice. A woman's voice, whispering from the woods. It sounded like it was saying, "Wait." The voice was soft, almost pleading, but neither of them dared to look back. They drove down the mountain in silence, too terrified to speak. Emily kept glancing in the side mirrors, half expecting to see the figure in the back seat or following them down the winding road. The tension eased as they left the mountains behind, returning to civilization and the comfort of city lights. But that night, when Emily was alone in her apartment, she felt something strange. Her window was open, even though she was sure she'd closed it. As she moved to shut it, she heard a whisper, a familiar, haunting whisper just outside. She froze, her heart pounding, and slowly closed the window. She told herself it was just her imagination, residual fear from the cabin. But every night after, she felt that strange presence, a heaviness, as if something unseen was watching her. A week later, Mark called her, his voice shaky. "Emily," he said, barely able to get the words out. "I saw her again. Outside my window, she was scratching at the glass." They compared notes, both horrified to realize that the same figure seemed to follow them home. Each night, the scratching grew louder, and the woman seemed to get closer. as if she was slowly breaking down the barriers between herself and their world. But one night, the scratching stopped, replaced by something even worse. Silence. Emily sat in her darkened apartment holding her breath, waiting. She couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was near, watching her. Then the whispers returned, but this time, they weren't coming from outside. They were coming from inside her apartment. The whispers grew louder, forming words, haunting phrases that echoed in her mind. "Let me in. I'm so close. I can see you." Terrified, Emily called Mark, but he didn't answer. She spent the entire night huddled in her bedroom, clutching a flashlight, praying that the scratching wouldn't start again. At dawn, she called him back, but there was still no answer. Frantic, she drove to his apartment. When she arrived, she found his door slattle. She pushed it open and stepped inside, calling his name. The apartment was silent, untouched, but the sense of dread hung heavy in the air. She finally found him in his bedroom. Mark was sitting on the bed, staring blankly at the wall, his face pale and expressionless. He didn't respond to her, didn't even blink. And then she noticed the scratches. Long, jagged scratches covered the walls, the floor, even the ceiling, as if something had been trying to claw its way out. Emily took a step back, horrified, realizing that Mark was clutching something in his hand. It was a shard of glass stained with blood. He finally looked at her, his eyes wide with terror, and whispered, "She's here. She won't leave. I can see her." As Emily turned to leave, she caught sight of something in the hallway mirror. A figure standing just behind her, close enough that she could feel its icy breath on her neck. Her reflection showed a woman with no face, only a smooth, empty expanse where her features should have been. Emily ran out, slamming the door behind her, but as she sprinted down the hall, she heard the same whisper following her. "Wait, don't leave me. I'm coming for you." She escaped the building, but she knew she would never be truly free. The faceless woman would follow her, scratching, whispering, drawing closer each night until there was nowhere left to run.